Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball.
Welcome into another episode of the Heat Check Hangout. I'm your host, Connor Hope, joined again by our new co-host, Riley Davis, and we're joined by Tristan Freeman of Busting Brackets to discuss the ACC and preview the ACC this year. Obviously, Riley comes from a UNC fanhood, and Tristan being a Pittsburgh Panthers fan, both ACC teams. So it's the perfect group to join me, a West Coaster, to talk about the Atlantic Seaboard. Riley, thanks for joining me. Tristan, thanks for hopping on.
Thank you for having me on. And just to make the record known, that the last time Pitt and UNC played, the Panthers dominated in Chapel Hill. Just letting that go.
Enjoy that, because that'll be the last win y'all get on us for a while, at least as long as Capel's there. But yeah, I'm glad to talk about the ACC tonight, just because we don't know how many more years we're going to be talking about the ACC. You know, it could be a conference that very well either does not exist. I'm sure it'll exist, but will look vastly different in the next 2 years, I would bet.
Yeah, I mean, it could, right? The SEC and the Big Ten have been poaching teams left and right, and there could be teams that are left kind of SOL because of it. But I'm sure, the ACC will either then have to try to pick up the pieces by poaching teams from the A10, or those teams might join a conference like the A10 or the American. We'll see what happens. There's no better place to start right now when previewing the ACC with last year's national runner-up. Riley, obviously, you're a big UNC guy, and I could see this season starting off where the top 25 has UNC getting the most number one votes, but not being the number one team. And I think a lot of people are wary of UNC calling them things like UCLA because of the way UCLA was seen for most of last year with their struggles after coming in incredibly hyped off a Final Four run. Riley, what would you say to people who view UNC this year in a very similar light to the way they viewed UCLA last year?
Yeah, one of the first things I would point people to, if you made that comparison, is how UNC performed over the last 6 weeks of the season, even heading into the tournament. I think last year, or 2 years ago, if you look at that UCLA team, how many games did they lose in a row? They lost at least 2 heading into the tournament and were a first 4 team. I want to say they might have lost something like 4 out of 6 going into the tournament, and I could be a little off there, whereas I know Tristan already alluded to that Pitt loss in Chapel Hill, which probably bottom 5 night for me as a UNC fan. That was it doesn't get much worse than watching Pitt just like slaughter your team in Chapel Hill. But after that game, there was quite the turnaround where, like, even looking at Bart Torvik's metrics, it had UNC as a top 4 team starting on the day, like from every game after that game in mid-February through the rest of the season. And even like pre-tournament, I think I remember looking at UNC's metrics during that time span where they were still like a top 15-ish team and then really started to elevate as the tournament went on. They might have been even higher heading into the tournament from that time span on Torvik. But so I think it does matter that they did sustain that level of play for more than just, 2 or 3 weeks in March, but actually like a month and a half. And part of that, I think, was taking some time to adjust to a new coach. I think like anytime you replace a legend, it's tough, especially for someone like Hubert Davis, who had only been an assistant coach before and had never been the head honcho. And so that adjustment period you're not going to see. And I do think that was unique for UNC last year, whereas Cronin had already been at UCLA for, I think, 2 years heading into the season where they got hot and made the Final Four run. So that would sort of be from like a more, off the court storyline with the coaching change and also a little bit of the analytics and everything. But ultimately, too, I don't think last year's UCLA team had a player as dominant as Armando Bacot, which I think sets UNC apart. Just a guy who's going to get every single rebound that's there, has a nonstop motor, draws a ton of fouls, really nice touch around the basket, fundamental in the post. in addition to that, having guards that are more crafty with the ball in their hands, like with Caleb Love and R.J. Davis. Where, I mean, I love Tiger Campbell. I think he's a terrific playmaker out of ball screens, and of course, Juzang was a tough shot maker. Jules Bernard could make some big shots, but I don't think any of those three could quite break their man down like both Caleb and RJ can do, which matters. And Caleb Love's going to take a lot of shots, and having a player like Armando Bacot who will get every offensive rebound, it's about as good of a pairing as Caleb could hope for. With, if he has those off nights, like he has that cushion there where Armando's going to be there to grab the rebound. So, yeah, that would be my rebuttal.
Tristan, how do you view UNC heading into this year? Right, to me, it's similar to UCLA, where UCLA didn't have a ton of turnover. They brought in a couple key pieces. Obviously, the big turnover for UNC is replacing Brady Manick, who was an elite offensive player, with Pete Nance, who might be a better two-way player than Manick was, but certainly doesn't give them what Manick did on the offensive end. They also bring in Trimble and Washington, two pretty big freshmen. Trimble obviously provides a little bit more depth behind those 2 point guards that'll be starting. What are your expectations for UNC?
Yeah, I think when people compare North Carolina from last year to this season, they talk about them being an 8 seed, going from the 8 seed to them being number 1 in the preseason. But if you look at their roster, forget about whatever they did last year, they have one of the top players in the country come back in Bacot, which could compare against teams with like Gonzaga, Kentucky, and them. They have their own top 5 player in the country. The backcourt of Caleb Love and R.J. Davis, you can argue is a top 10, 15 backcourt of the country, especially when they're on. They got one of the best pure defenders in the country in Leaky Black. They got a bench filled with top 100 talent that, if given the opportunity, who knows how many of them can be a breakout guy. And when you look at Pete Nance, he's a 6'10" guy that can play multiple positions, solid enough defender. He can space the floor, which is automatically what you need having with Bacot. I think the only issue people have with the Tar Heels is that they just don't want to take a team that was effectively on the bubble last year until a couple of weeks to be in the preseason number 1 team, whereas teams like Houston and Gonzaga and even Kentucky were in the top 10 last year and returned, a good amount of their talent, which would make it easier for them. I don't think it's a good way to judge rosters for the upcoming year. I think just on their own, the Tar Heels have truly one of the best collective rosters in the country. You have to give the coach credit. You can trust him that he can win. And it should be Final Four bus for the Tar Heels, considering what they brought back and the fact that they have a National Player of the Year contender in Bacot to lead the way.
Yeah, and I think that's why I said I think UNC is going to have the most number 1 votes, because I think there are a lot of people, myself included, who are very on board with North Carolina being the best team and the most talented team heading into this year. But I do think there's going to be quite a few teams that have them 3rd, 4th, maybe even lower, because they are comparing them to a UCLA team that, let's be honest, wasn't actually all that bad last year. They just didn't live up to that potential number 1 hype. So I could see a lot of people having UNC in that 4 to 6 to 7 area just because they're worried about just a run.
I also would add that if you look at UCLA's best players, which was Hawkes and Juzang, that they're not on the level of a Bacot. So you look at the top end of the Tar Heels talent. You also look at the fact that, the pieces UCLA had was good, like Tiger Campbell's solid. They have a lot of solid to above average talent, but they didn't have guys that could on their own just win a game for them. Like, it had to truly be a group effort. Games in which Hawkes struggled, they wasn't going to win. Juzang struggled, they weren't going to win. You've had games where Love struggled, but then R.J. Davis goes for 30 for them. You have games where both guards struggle, Bacot carries it for them. So I think just looking at the high-end part of the Tar Heels puts them in every game. And when they show up, particularly on a defensive end, for all 40 minutes, they can beat anybody in the country. You couldn't necessarily say that about UCLA, and I thought that the Gonzaga game early on in the season showed that they were a clear on another tier than the top teams in the country. I don't think anybody this season can say that they're a tier above the Tar Heels.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is I do think like the loss of Brady Manick does tend to get underplayed a little bit. I think Pete Nance is a fantastic basketball player. I love his skill set. I love what he brings. And at least judging by like the UNC hosted a intra-squad scrimmage a couple weeks ago, they ran a lot of dribble handoffs with Pete, a lot more DHOs than we ever saw them run with Brady last year. So I'm wondering, like last year, Carolina ran a ton of high ball screen pick and pops for Brady Manick, and I am curious to see how much of that gets altered to where like you might see a little more dribble handoff action as opposed to those pick and pops. But I think Pete is still a good enough shooter to where you have to account for him when he's beyond the arc. Like you can't just sag off of him, and he'll get his fair share of open looks, because I think like in those pick and pop scenarios, like either RJ or Caleb will still command a ton of attention. But he's a vastly different player from Brady Manick. He's not always looking to shoot. He has a slower release, is a little bit more of an unorthodox jumper than Manick's. That was just like as soon as he touched it, it seemed like the ball was leaving his hands. So that is a big loss. I think Nance is about as good as they could have done to replace him. But yeah, that's the one thing that could set the offense back a little bit more than we might realize now or give credence to.
The team that arguably sparked UNC's run late in the season, not Pitt. I'm talking about the team that lost at home in their last home game again under their legendary coach, the Duke Blue Devils.
Hey, make sure people don't forget that. I want to hear it from a non-UNC fan. Let them know.
They are the opposite of UNC. They also went to the Final Four, have a ton of turnover, including head coach. They lose the number 1 overall pick in the NBA draft, Paolo Banchero. They lose Mark Williams, who was one of the best rim protectors in the country. This is a team that I think is going to be relying a lot on Jeremy Roach to just be an elite level point guard, because the only other person they have that I'm looking at that's not a freshman that I'm really trusting to step into that role and be really good with it is Jacob Grandison. But he's going to be a role player. He's going to bring a veteran presence, but he's not going to be a star. This is a Duke team that has plenty of talent, should probably finish in the top 10. But Tristan, am I wrong for not necessarily buying into Duke as much as I did last year when they were still a young team?
No, because if it wasn't for the NCAA tournament, I wouldn't be surprised if Duke went into the portal and brought themselves in a point guard. Like they would have tried to go after Kendrick Davis. Like Roach, I think, in a way, saved his Duke career with his run in the NCAA tournament, because he was in and off of the bench, not having a huge role. And you talked about, not having the number 1 pick, Paul Banchero. I would argue that Wendell Moore, that his absence is just as big of an issue, because he was a de facto point guard for them. He was the creator in many ways, and not having him, he took a lot of pressure off of Roach. So not having him, it's like Roach has to be the point guard. He can't just be the guy that can score. He did show he can score, but can he facilitate? And he's going to have to facilitate towards all these freshmen. And, you can trust that Derek Lively can replace Mark Williams in some way. You can see Phil Kowski having a role. When Dariq Whitehead comes back, he'll be, the solid double-digit scorer for them. But in order for it to work, you have to have great point guard play. Like, that's what we saw the teams made the Final Four. That's who advances in March. If Jeremy Roach looks like he did before last March, then they're going to be an easy out. Everyone's going to pick them, regardless of what their seed is, to go out early, because if you stop Roach, you can stop Duke. But his consistency is going to be the biggest storyline of any team in the ACC, because as he goes, Duke's going to go.
Riley, which of these freshmen should scare you the most if you are a player or a fan of one of the teams that Duke plays early in the season? as they get underway, because I think that's who's going to establish themselves as the alpha. It's really established early, and there are going to be some of these teams that they play early on in the season. Like, who would be the key defensively that you need to pay attention to?
Can I still pick Dariq Whitehead even though he's injured? Because I think Dariq Whitehead is terrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you just take it's the Montverde pedigree for one. Like Montverde dudes rarely don't pan out. It's just like, I mean, it's a factory, like a powerhouse for a reason. And I think just that role that he's in where he's going to have the ball in his hands a ton. I mean, he'll probably be given, I could see him having like a similar usage to RJ Barrett. Even though they have Filipowski and they have Lively in the front court, like, because Whitehead can really do it all. I mean, he's super bouncy, has a decent enough shot. He's got good feel, cerebral, good passer. I think RJ Barrett probably averaged somewhere between like 3.5 to 4.5 assists. I think that's very much in the realm of possibility for Whitehead. And I just think that kind of Duke has they get pretty much any wing they want for a reason, because they have a lot of guys they can who they've had success with at that position as a sort of a three who can swing down to the four in a pinch and play a ton with the ball in his hands and not just get his own shot, but also find open men and keep the ball moving. Which sounds a little ironic saying that about RJ Barrett, because he definitely had his moments where he wanted to play some hero ball, but he did have his moments where he could probe the defense and find open men from that too, and I think we're going to see that same kind of role from Dariq Whitehead.
After Duke, there's a pretty big gap between the top two, I think, in preseason rankings, and the next 3 or 4 teams. I'd go with 3. I think those 3 are probably Virginia, Florida State, Miami. You might be able to, some people might throw a Virginia Tech and a Notre Dame in there, but I think those 3 that I named are probably squarely in that mix of fringe top 25 teams. Which of those teams, if Duke were to start off slow in ACC play, given the freshmen, like which of those teams do you think has the best shot, Riley, of vaulting themselves into that conversation as the number 2 seed in the ACC tournament?
I think Florida State probably has the highest ceiling of that group, just because you have Matthew Cleveland coming back, who that dude could put like Dwayne Bacon-like numbers in an offense that's typically very egalitarian. And if people might have forgot, Dwayne Bacon averaged something like 16 or 17 points per game at Florida State as a sophomore. I think Cleveland is that good. Like that dude can finish. He shot like 65% at the rim last year, kind of gets there pretty easily. And if he can just prove himself a little bit as a 3-point shooter, I mean, that's like a dark horse ACC player of the year, in my opinion. I don't really know what the Noles are expecting to get out of Jalen Warley. He's sort of another one of those like high upside guys, but it might not happen this year. I know he's got the pedigree, but yeah, didn't do a lot last year. But I'm pretty high on Virginia. I think they're definitely like the safer floor. I want to say like last year, my guess would be it was sort of a one-off for a Bennett team that just sort of looked out of sorts, didn't have that ferocious defense that we've become so accustomed to seeing. But I like Virginia a lot to have a bounce back here. So I'd say that's a safer pick, but like the upside swing would be Florida State.
Tristan, which of these teams do you think, because I think there's probably going to be a lot of debate here, because I've seen a lot of Kihei Clark love. I've seen a lot of Kihei Clark hate. Is Kihei Clark or Caleb Mills for you a more reliable point guard? Caleb Mills, obviously of Florida State, Kihei Clark of Virginia, because I think that could end up being the difference between which of these teams can push themselves.
Yeah, I don't think it's close. I think Kihei Clark I trust, because I'm not sure if Caleb Mills is even a point guard. Like, a lot of guys can be combo guards, but just because you can bring the ball up the court doesn't mean you can facilitate an offense and make guys better. And I think that was the issue last year, is that Jalen Warley wasn't ready and Caleb Mills wasn't really able to do it. Like, ultimately, I think Mills is better as an off guard. Him and the UCF transfer Darren Green. Like, I think if Warley steps up and becomes that point guard for them, then I think definitively Florida State's a third best team. I think the problem with Kihei Clark, and if you want to put his backcourt, make Reese Beekman together, is sort of, if you want to compare him to Portland, the Portland Trailblazers in the NBA with Lillard and the guy who got traded McCollum? McCollum. Yeah, it's that they're just small. And that's no matter how good defensively they are, they're just going to get bullied by bigger teams. Like, and for example, they had 2 close games against Pitt. And Pitt had, a bigger guard in Femi Odekale, who in the second game was able to get whatever he wanted. And if you can, get inside on them, Jaden Gardner, he's a solid defender, but not great. You can get by them. And Virginia's not really a good 3-point shooting team. So it's hard for a team that can sometimes barely score. If they can't hit shots, you can easily beat them. So I think from a point guard perspective, I obviously trust Virginia's more, but I think that there's a ceiling that the Cavaliers have. You bring back everyone back from a team that didn't make the tournament. It's hard to project them to make that. But unless Florida State gets a true point guard and some consistent front court production, it's hard to trust them too. And if you want to include Miami in the mix, when we talk about them, I wonder if they even have a point guard. Because I think we look at Nigel Pack, is he really a point guard, or is he just another combo shooting guard to pair with Isaiah Wong? And the problem with that Miami had before was you paired Wong with Chris Likes. That didn't work out for obvious reasons because Chris Likes really isn't a point guard. And I think there's a potential for that same thing to happen with this pair. And they could be really good, when it comes to creating their own offense, but I'm not sure they'll be able to create for others like Charlie Moore was able to do for them. So it'll be interesting, but for those three, they might be the next tier, but I'm not sure they're definitively better than the next set of teams in the ACC.
T, I got to stop you and go back a few minutes. I can't let you get away with comparing Kihei Clark to Dame Lillard. I'm sorry. That's a very unhydrated take to make.
I'm not saying he's as good as them, but I think the reason why Portland couldn't win was because they didn't believe that backcourt was good enough, partly because they're both small guards. So you eventually had to break it up. You can't break up Kihei Clark and Reese Beekman, but you do have to wonder, is that
pretty good size?
It's okay, but he's small he's effectively a point guard in his own right, and it's like he plays off guard.
Yeah.
That backcourt, can be a trouble. But I also don't blame Kihei Clark for some of the issues over there, because I think you can argue that Armand Franklin really isn't a starting player on a contending team. Like, ideally, he should be coming off the bench.
Yeah. I think, I'm not the first person to say this. I would probably say Virginia would be that third team for me if Kihei had just left instead of exercising this 5th year. Just because, I really want to see Reese Beekman get his chance to run the show. I love Reese Beekman. I think that dude is an absolute dog. I know he might not be the tallest, Tristan, but, he's got long arms. He's super quick, swift hips, just keeps opposing guards in his back pocket, even if he is a little bit maybe undersized compared to some other 2 guards or some wings. And I think I want to say he was a top 5 in the ACC in assist rate or something last year. He's proven he can create for others as well. He just needs to prove himself to even if he can even get a mid-range game, that would be a start. I want to say he shot 31 to 32% from 3, so he's not awful, but proving himself in that area too. Because I think coming out of high school, he was a top 60-ish guy who probably had NBA dreams, and there probably still is some legit NBA potential there. I just want to see him get the chance to get that Malcolm Brogdon type usage rate and get Kihei out of there. But that's not happening this year.
Yeah, my biggest concern with Miami, it's the same concern I had last year. Mm-hmm. They're just small. And you bring in Norchad Omie, who was great at Arkansas State, but it was Arkansas State, and he's also only 6'7", so he's going to be playing probably the de facto center for Miami against these other 4 teams that all have 7-footers or near 7-footers, and on top of that, making that leap from an Arkansas State level to a Miami level of competition. We'll see how that works out. I think given the guard play they have, they can certainly do damage in March. I just don't know where they'll land when it comes to a season-long type of performance. The next 2 teams, I kind of mentioned them earlier. The first one is Virginia Tech. Obviously had that crazy run in the ACC tournament last year where it seemed like they couldn't miss from 3. Riley, do you view Virginia Tech as closer to those top 5 teams we mentioned, or closer to maybe like a Notre Dame or another team in the ACC that might be kind of on the bubble, either in or out?
I would be very shocked if Virginia Tech doesn't make the tournament. I think that's a clear tournament team. Like you look at those 3 guards, Padula, Darius Maddox, and Hunter Couture. I mean, that's going to be a lethal shooting trio. And I mean, Padula, throw out whatever like white point guard stereotypes you want to make, but he will actually battle a little bit on defense, like despite any sort of like athletic limitations. And Couture, like under Mike Young's tutelage, he's become a decent defender as well. I think he's not just some dude who's going to get out there and gun, but he's fantastic at running off of screens and everything, but he's not only looking to shoot, he plays on both sides of the floor now. I love Justin Mutz. I think Justin Mutz is definitely an all-conference type player. Love his versatility. He's also just a really smart basketball player. Like the way he moves without the ball, he's really crafty with how he sets his screens, and like he sort of uses like some deception with like ghost screens and that type of stuff, and gets open, just cutting around like in Mike Young's labyrinthine, however you say that word, offense. So I really like Virginia Tech. I think they're a clear-cut tournament team, and yeah, I wouldn't say they're like the Carolina Duke level, but it wouldn't be totally surprising to see them finish 3rd or 4th in the league. The only question is depth, which it has been the last couple of years, but I mean, Mike Young has proven that he's been able to find some diamonds in the rough, unheralded guys that fit what he's looking for.
Tristan, how concerned are you for this Virginia front court? Because I know you have Justin Mutz returning, which is huge. You've got a couple of up transfers and then a lot of freshmen that are likely going to be the ones filling that 5 spot. And then, depending on whether or not Young goes big or small at the 4 in certain lineups, might be playing a lot of the 4. That's my biggest concern when it comes to Virginia Tech. Like, I trust that backcourt more than almost any other backcourt other than North Carolina's. But that front court to me is just scary when it comes to, again, competing with the front courts that you'll see in the top 5.
I'm personally not as sold on the backcourt as you guys. Like I think you saw the struggle Storm Murphy had. It took him almost all season to get it going in there. Kenshawn Padula, and there's a difference between being an effective role player for 10 to 15 minutes when you're not being scouted versus when you're getting all the attention when you're playing 25, 30 minutes. I'm not 100% sold that Padula and Couture can do that. Like, I think if you guard Couture on the 3, you can effectively sometimes just shut him out of the game. And I'm worried what Virginia Tech can do if they can't score. I think Mutz is a fantastic player. Like, his stats won't show it, but he's one of the, I would say, the top 15, 20 players in the ACC just because he can do a little bit of everything. And I also honestly wouldn't be surprised if he sort of takes a sort of a Jalen Williams role and actually potentially leads the team in assists next season because he's that good and that talented. The transfer of Grant Basile from Wright State, I have my concerns about how he'll fit because he's basically at 5, but he's not athletic enough to guard most 5s in the ACC. And his scoring, he likes to operate mostly inside. He's a big body. I think he can get double-digit scoring in there, but I'm also concerned that he'll give up even more than he scores. So how much of a role he has to play is going to be very interesting. I think one player that I think could determine the tournament hopes is going to be Memphis transfer John Camden, because he was on a Memphis team that had 50 wings, and so he wasn't going to get on the court, but he's a former top 50 prospect, someone who people are very high on. He could potentially start for them, unless they go Darius Maddox or a 3-guard lineup. If he stands out and has a big role for them, then I think that could be another double-digit scorer that they desperately need. But if Justin Mutz is the guy that they have to rely on for everything, then they'll be on the bubble a lot, and it could go either way for them.
Yeah, I think you bring up some good points about Basile with just defensive concerns. I mean, coming from I could be mistaken, but Tristan, you might have to check me on this, but I don't think Wright State was like the highest quality defensive team.
No, and they played Robert Morris twice, and Robert Morris got whatever they wanted on them. They're just
Okay.
they just never were good defensively.
Right. I don't follow the Horizon League because I like watching good basketball, but I do think what Mike Young has going for him here is that he does have a track record of finding these mid-major guys like Aluma, like Justin Mutz, who have been able to successfully transfer up a level. And I know it took a little while for Storm Murphy to get going, and I don't know if I'd exactly say Storm was like a success. You know, he had his moments, but it was not this seamless transition like it seemed like it was for both Mutz and Aluma. But, you know, to Young's credit, like both those guys are front court players, and looking at Basile, clearly maybe he sees something there that he figures will be able to still make an impact in the ACC play.
The last team I wanted to talk about, and then we'll cover the rest of the teams in kind of some quick hitters, is Notre Dame. I think they're the last team that has a really good shot at making the tournament. My concern for them is kind of the flip of the concern we talked about with the previous two teams. Like, I like Liszewski, I like Goodwin. I'm starting to come around on Cormac Ryan, but trusting freshman JJ Starling or, you know, transfer Marcus Hammond or Trey Wirtz to run the point for Notre Dame is not something that I really want to do. Like, that's where it scares me. Is like, I feel like Notre Dame could be really competitive over the course of the season, but do they have the guard play to sustain that through March? Tristan, are you in or out on Notre
I'm
Dame?
out. This is largely the same core that was awful the 2 years prior towards Blake. Forgot his name
Wesley.
already. But yeah, Blake Wesley coming in and leading the way. And, you know, if Starlin or Hammond can do that for them, then I could be in. But I think this is a roster filled with largely role players. And even if you assume that Liszewski's numbers will rise back up now that Paul Atkinson's back, there's really no front court depth outside of him. Like, will Matt Zona show up? Will Van Allen, the freshman, will he have a big year? I'm not sold on Notre Dame's defense. I'm not sold on the overall depth. I think their guards will be fine, but again, they needed Blake Wesley to do a lot for them. And without him, I'm not certain that it'll be a seamless transition, even though this is going to be one of the oldest teams in the country.
You don't think Starling can give them, like, what, 80% of what Blake Wesley gave them? Like, I think that could be a possibility. Maybe like 90%. I think Starling's he's a stud.
I think he can, but they're like, even in intangibles, like there were just times when Blake Wesley just put the team on his back and just willed them to victory. You never know with top 30 freshmen. He can be like a solid role player for them, and he does his job, but he may have to be a leader. Like, this is a roster filled with role players that they sort of just play their role and that's it. Like, who's going to be the guy that's going to give them 15 to 20 in a game where everyone else is struggling? Can it be Starling? Can it potentially be Hammond? I don't know, but I think Notre Dame is a team that has the potential on one night to give Duke and UNC a scare, but they also could be very vulnerable to Boston College and Clemson as well, and that could throw their record to a complete question mark.
Yeah, that's a good point about Starling, and just compared to Wesley. Wesley did have some big moments last year, and I think his athleticism and how I know he wasn't necessarily the most efficient player, but like with his bounce and his explosiveness, he could get to the rim when he wanted to. And I think Starling's a different player than that. A little more finesse and more shooting, more creation off the bounce. So yeah, you do raise some good points about that, but yeah. What do you do?
So, you know, after those 7 teams, I think there's a lot of teams in there that I don't view necessarily as tournament teams, but I certainly don't view them in the same vein that I view Louisville or Georgia Tech. So I'm just going to go down the list. I'm going to ask each of you if you're in on them being competitive in the middle of the ACC and potentially pushing for, you know, a bubble spot, or if you're out on them as a potential bubble team or a competitive team at all in the ACC. Why don't we start off? I'll let Tristan give the argument in favor of Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh falls squarely in that group where I think they have some good returners, they have some good newcomers. The question is just, can Jeff Capel put it together and make them competitive in ACC
I'll
play?
say the one pro is the fact that this is actually a balanced roster. I think last year Pitt had no guard play. They truly did not have a true point guard other than a walk-on, which is when Pitt's offense looks the best. And the year prior, they started 2 front court players that had no business getting minutes in the ACC. This year, you actually have players that can fill every role. John Hughley averaged 15 and 8 on an offense that had no perimeter shoot, no point guard play. Now with much better teammates, he's someone that I think could be truly an all-conference player. You add Dior Johnson, who at one point was a top 10 prospect. His stock clearly fell, but who knows? Now he's top 50. Now he can fly under the radar, potentially have a big year. Partner him with Nelly Cummins, who is one of the better, was a fifth-year transfer for Colgate. Solid point guard, play off the ball as well. There's a lot of veterans. A lot of potential when it comes to shooting in the backcourt. I think Pittsburgh, at bare minimum, will just be competitive, and they won't be a laughingstock offensively like they were last year, where they literally couldn't hit free throws or couldn't make three-pointers until midway through the year.
Riley, are you in or out on Pittsburgh, assuming that Dior Johnson stays committed?
I'm out, man. Like, I want to kind of be in because, like, you know, I like to rib Tristan about his food takes and his water takes and occasionally his basketball takes. But I want my friends to be happy. I want them to experience joy. I don't want them to be stuck watching Pitt, Robert Morris, and Duquesne, choosing to spend time watching those live basketball games, and for all 3 of those teams to just be putting out a grotesque product on there. I would love for at least Pitt to you know, take off some of that burden off of Tristan's plate. But it's just looking at Jeff Capel's resume. I mean, he's never finished higher than 97th on KenPom in 4 seasons. Never won more than 6 conference games. Like, that is so rough, even though I kind of like this roster and think they can be frisky. Like, I like Dior Johnson. I think I understand, like, the swing for the fences with Capel getting him, because if he pans out, you have is there a chance he becomes the best player in his Pitt tenure? Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it's like a great chance, but like when you look at the pedigree, there's definitely a chance. I think Nelly Cummins is a really fun guard and who can do a lot with the ball in his hands. I think Hughley, like Tristan said, is a beast. Like, to put up those numbers, like you said, when Ithiel Horton is your only legit perimeter shooter who's, you know, on and off the court for a variety of reasons, like that's they have pieces there. Yeah, I need Capel to prove something, anything, like before I say, like, yeah, I'm in on Pitt being competitive.
Totally
I want to
fair.
say in our heat check, ACC preview that I did a month or 2 ago. I can pull it up now and let you know. I want to say I picked Pitt to finish 11th.
Yes.
And I sort of wanted to pick them higher, but again, it's like I keep coming back to Capel because, you know, I picked like Clemson to finish higher than them, and Clemson has 0 guards. But you know, Brownell has a track record of at least getting Clemson to the middle of the pack. So yeah, that's my hang up on them.
We'll go to Clemson next. Tristan, what do you think the ceiling is for Clemson this year?
Like 12th, 11th, maybe. Like Riley said, they have no guards. Like, there's, like, on paper right now, their best guard is a transfer from Boston College who was their 4th best guard in Brevin Galloway. Like, that might be their lead guy. Like, maybe Joshua Beadle steps up. Alex Hemingway looked impressive on the overseas tour. He was making 3-point shots, but somebody has to step up. And even if they do, they had 3 double-digit scores last year, and they still were under 500. Like, they still were below average. And you add the fact that their best player, P.J. Hall, is going to be returning from injury. And for a big man who has to deal with a leg injury, that's not something that they can automatically just come right into. So they could have a really, really bad offseason unless someone steps up. And the fact that Hunter Tyson's their best healthy player right now doesn't give me a ton of confidence on him.
Yeah, you mentioning just.
You mentioned.
I was just gonna say like the lack of guards
Riley.
on Clemson. I know we'll hit Louisville towards the end because they're like at the bottom, but I just can't help but be like, dude, come on, like Brownell, Kenny Payne, I need y'all. Our conference just got clowned for literally the entire season until the tournament, and y'all can't even bring in one guard from the portal. Like,
in fairness, in fairness, Clemson did bring in Jalen Llewellyn,
Yeah.
and then he reneged on them and went to Michigan. Like that.
You
That's
gotta
still
wonder,
bad
though,
luck on their part.
like Dabo can't make a call to some football boosters and say drop a bag to get Llewellyn to stay. Like, I don't think Michigan. I don't know how Michigan's NIL is, but there's a lot of passionate Clemson fans in the area that I live in the country who I think, I don't know, could get behind at least having some sort of excitement in the backcourt. Like, you got to do something to keep that commitment and not let them get away. Like that guard group is, gosh, it's rough. But yeah, what were you going to say, Connor? I didn't mean to cut you off.
The next team. Oh, I was going to say the next team I wanted to talk about was the former team for Brevin Galloway, which is Boston College. Has been finishing towards the bottom of the ACC for some years now, and they do return Jaden Zachary, a 48% 3-point shooter, but they also return Mekhi Ashton Langford, who is the definition of a volume scorer. This is a team that I feel like, because of how weak the 8 down is in the ACC, they could finish with a single-digit seed in the ACC tournament. But I just don't want to buy into Boston College, even though, it's Earl Grant, it's a new coach. Last year, you saw, I guess, some improvement. Riley, what do you think about Boston College? And just a yes or no, are they a single-digit seed a single-digit finish in the ACC, or are they still in that bottom, 10 through, I think, 15 teams
I think
in the
they
ACC?
can get there. I mean, that 8 and 9. I think the top 7 teams are like so clearly ahead of the rest of the conference that those 8 and 9 spots are up for grabs. I think they played pretty hard under Earl Grant last year and had that little mini run in the ACC tournament to where, like, sure, why not? Y'all can get an 8 seed.
No, I'm out. I
Tristan?
can't trust a team where your best player is Mekhi Ashton Langford. Like, he's fine, but you have a bunch of okay pieces on the roster. There is genuine star power between the teams between 6 and 12. Like, I don't think Boston College is going to be good enough to get single digit.
The next team is Syracuse. They lose Buddy Boeheim. They lose Jimmy Boeheim. Cole Swider, much to the chagrin of Syracuse fans, they do not lose Jim Boeheim. They lose the Carrier Dome. It has been renamed. So I don't know if that happened before last season or after last season, but it is no longer the Carrier Dome for those of you who did not know. I want to like this roster. I think it's pretty good. Joe Girard is a solid, role player as a starter. Jesse Edwards is a pretty solid big. There's just not a lot there besides those two, and maybe Judah Mintz if he pays off. Tristan, what are your expectations?
You literally just said that there
Orange?
may be 2 good players and a half on a whole roster, and you're going to try and say that it's going to be. It comes down. Will Vinnie Williams do something? Like, will he be a breakout star? You can't trust freshmen lately with Jim Boeheim because who knows if they're going to play. Jesse Edwards is solid. Joe Girard, he's probably going to have to take 15 to 20 shots a game. Like, it's going to be an issue. Judah Mintz will be fine, but I feel like because we genuinely respect Jim Boeheim, we won't say that Syracuse will finish like 12th or 13th in this league. But there's a legitimate chance from a talent standpoint they will, because they're not potent offensively. They don't scare you defensively. And I just don't see any hope for them unless you think Jesse Edwards becomes the next Drew Timme offensively.
Riley, what are your expectations for the Orange?
13th in my like ACC rankings a month ago. Just because, like, dude, that perimeter I get Joe Girard can make tough shots. I get he's made a ton of threes in his career. And I admittedly haven't watched a ton of Judah Mintz. Some folks I know, like in the recruiting world or who have watched him live, are pretty high on him. I believe our friend Terrence Oglesby thinks he's the real deal. And so, yeah, a lot's going to, I mean, pretty much everything's going to ride on him offensively, because like they need someone else other than Girard to be able to score. Yeah, Vinnie Williams, that dude was chained to the bench last year, nailed to the bench, I guess is the right term. Who knows what to expect from him? And it's kind of tough because I think like the two other freshmen they have coming in who at least had some sort of pedigree are a wing named Justin Taylor, who's been like billed as a elite shooter. I think he's a pretty good shooter coming off of screens on the move and everything, where maybe, you know, Boeheim sold him on a Buddy Boeheim type role in the future, but he still was like a top 120-ish guy maybe. And then another guy, Chris Bunch, I want to say he has some sort of pedigree. Maybe he played at Brewster or something. I want to say he played at like one of the better like basketball prep schools. And it's sort of frustrating because I think on, you know, a normal team with maybe a more youthful, vibrant coach would give these young dudes who are a little less heralded but have some sort of pedigree a chance to shine. But like Tristan said, I mean, those dudes just could get buried on the bench if Boeheim's going to play like a 6 or 7 man rotation, when they could at least, you know, provide excitement for Syracuse fans for the future if they got some. Like, it might not change the on-court results some, but you would at least have a little bit of anticipation or something to look forward to in the future than just, yeah, watching Joe Girard take 20 shots a game. And, yeah.
The last team that's really in this group is NC State for me. You know, they lose Seabrod and his 17 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists per game. They lose Jerry Cole-Helims. They lose Cam Hayes. But they bring in some solid players. Jarkel Joyner was a 13-point per game player for Mississippi last year. You know, can play the point. This is another team I feel like you run into this issue with Joyner and Terquavian Smith, which is like, are either of them really a point guard? They have Casey Borsell as well returning alongside Smith. They bring in Jack Clark and DJ Burns and Dusan Mahorcic to play those three, you know, rotate in at those 2 front court positions. Again, LaSalle, Winthrop. Utah's not a step up, but Mahorcic would be taking a step up in terms of his role, likely. Tristan, real quick, NC State, what are your expectations?
Than last year, because I think that you'll have guys who actually want to play a role. Last year was correct.
Well, they
correct.
can't be worse than
last year. Was basically 3 guys who wanted to score, and when they did nothing. Like this year is clearly Smith's offense with a bunch of guys that can do things. My only concern is DJ Burns, similar to what you talked about with Omier. He's an undersized forward that isn't going to space the floor too much. Like if his game don't translate, what's the front court play going to be for NC State? So they'll be better and more competitive, especially on a defensive end, but it will likely come down to whether or not Smith goes for 20 plus. If he doesn't, they'll lose. If he can, they'll have a shot.
Riley, what are your expectations for NC State?
And that's not just like my UNC homerism. I don't really have anything against NC State's basketball team. I don't really prey on their downfall or anything. I just like you said, I don't like Turk is not really a point guard. He has a tendency to over dribble some. He's gonna let that thing fly and get his like 20 shots a game, probably 10 of which will be 3-pointers. He's a good enough shooter. Like for NC State, you probably want him taking close to 10 threes a game, because I think that's your best bet to stay in it on offense. I don't know, just like looking at Keats's last few seasons, there have been some alarming trends. His teams haven't played with that the fast tempo that he was known for since 2019. Been outside of the top 100 in tempo over the last 3 seasons. Defense has fallen off a cliff, and I think last year they didn't even force turnovers at an elite rate, or maybe not even an elite rate, at a good rate, which is something that Keats's teams have always been able to do. And just bringing in like Joyner and even Burns, Burns played 20 minutes a game for Winthrop. I don't know how they're going to expect to get more than that from him at NC State and the ACC. Like, just some of their new pieces, I'm not really seeing how they heighten the ceiling heighten the defensive ceiling. And also, I mean, losing Sebron is tough. Like, Sebron was an automatic paint touch who could get to the basket at will, and basically a 6'8" point guard. And so there's no one like that on the roster.
A step below those, or maybe even on the same level as NC State or some of these other teams we discussed. The two teams that I think are clearly being discussed as the worst two teams, or at least the two teams that a lot of people think will be the worst heading into this season, Louisville and Georgia Tech. Louisville, the Malik Williams hype era is over. Entering every season thinking that Malik Williams was going to do something and then being disappointed very quickly in the season with how much he actually did is over. But so is any sort of sustained minutes on this roster that they have, right? They have two players who played over 15 minutes a game last year in Jalen Withers, L. Ellis. L. Ellis being the only player on this roster that has played 20 or more minutes a game at 20.5. I don't know what it is with Kenny Payne. Just was not able to recruit in the way that I think a lot of people might have expected him to be recruiting when he was hired by Louisville. On the other side, you've got Georgia Tech, finished 14th, one game ahead of NC State last year. Obviously, they have Josh Pastner, the type of coach that would make Jose Alvarado and only Jose Alvarado run through a brick wall. Lose Mike DeVoe, lose Jordan Usher. And really, they add Lance Terry and Javon Franklin, who might not even be starters for them. So, like, I don't know what you can expect from either of these teams. But I guess the question I'll pose to you, Riley, is if you had to pick one of these teams and place a bet on them finishing last in the ACC between Georgia Tech and Louisville,
Georgia Tech
who would
with
it
a
be?
bullet, dude. That roster is so bad. My gosh. You're leaning on, like, their highest upside pieces are a Gardner-Webb transfer and a South Alabama transfer. Like, what else needs to be said? And that's no disrespect to Gardner-Webb. I got mad love for Tim Kraft and my running Bulldogs in the Big South. But, yeah, you're kind of just depending on them to be, like, your offense, because no one else returning is really any good unless Rodney Howard excites you. I mean, I couldn't even tell you a single Rodney Howard moment over the last 3 years, and he's about to be a senior at Tech. With Louisville, at least last year, like, they were ranked 127th on KenPom, but that was the best one. That was the best 127th ranked team I've ever seen. They didn't get blown out that much. They at least, like, I think the Chris Mack firing and the Malik Williams suspension seemed to galvanize them to an extent where they at least would play hard. Yeah, and at least they have, like, a former top 50 kid in Brendan Hunley Hatfield, who would easily be the best player on Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
Tristan.
The problem, though, when you talk
court.
about Louisville being competitive, is they actually had depth. They had 3 point guards. They had 2 shooting guards. They have literally right now one ACC level point guard, well, actually perimeter player in L. Ellis, and he was in a 3-way timeshare with 2 other point guards. He couldn't even win the point guard battle with them. And now he's going to get 30 to 35 minutes, and he has to play well for them that shot. The other issue I have is arguably Sidney Curry might be their best player. He looked that way towards the end of the year. And you add Huntley Hatfield, who I'm not sure is a 4. Like, he might be a 5. So you're going to put the same situation with that you had with Malik Williams, which is 2 bigs trying to make that work, and they might have no choice. The only reason why I would pick them over Georgia Tech, though, because I think freshman Kamari Lands and Devin Reed is better than anything Georgia Tech has. Like, I think Debo Coleman has a chance to be a good player for them, but if he is their best player, then they're hopeless. They have nothing. They basically lost their 2 best players and replaced them with 2 players that are at least lesser versions to them. So they arguably got worse this offseason. So if you assume that they're going to do worse next year, so obviously with teams getting better, I could easily see this team go 1-2 games at the most, and that's only because anything crazy can happen at home in league play. But Georgia Tech is not only the worst team in the ACC, I think they're clearly the worst power conference team this upcoming season.
Behind Cal.
Because at least Cal will get wins over Oregon State and Washington.
Hey, you did forget
Fair
one.
enough.
You did forget one
Fair
key
enough.
factor with L. Ellis, and that's the fact that he's from Durham, North Carolina, which means there's always a chance he at least could like go off against Duke or Carolina in like a revenge type fashion. Those types of players always love to, have their best games against UNC and Duke. So that also could separate Louisville from a little bit more from Georgia Tech. But I still think
that also would explain though why he lost to Pitt last year too, since that tends to be a North Carolina.
Riley, this is a question just for you. Other than Georgia Tech, how many of these other ACC backcourts would L. Ellis be a starter in?
Now that's a good question. Let me do the. He could probably earn a starting job at Syracuse if Boeheim wanted to do a little 3-guard lineup. He would 100% earn a starting job at Clemson. I don't know if he beats out the Langford Bros and Zachary in Boston College. Definitely not Virginia. Definitely not Virginia Tech. I mean, maybe at Florida State. Could he unseat Caleb Mills or Jalen Worley?
Yeah.
Probably not.
He couldn't even beat out Mason Faulkner.
All right, fair point.
And Jared West last year.
All right, maybe I need to reevaluate.
And
Look, he had a good game against Carolina. One of the games they played, I want to say he might made like 4 or 5 threes. And those dudes who ball out against UNC always like stick with me. Where I'm like, Chris Likes went off against Carolina in like 2019, and to this day I'm like, yeah.
and then didn't see the floor when he was on Arkansas.
Yeah, going into last season, I was like, I don't know, Chris Likes, he's a bit of a bucket. He got 27 points on Carolina 3 years ago.
Okay. So we'll go through. We will give our projected standings in groups. Does anyone have any argument against UNC Duke 1-2, or can we just move on? Okay, those next 3, I have them: Virginia, Miami, Florida State. Tristan, how do you have them?
Ironically, I have Florida State 3, Virginia, Florida. Florida State 3, Virginia, Florida, and Virginia Tech 5. Yes.
Okay, and Miami 6. Okay,
I would
Riley?
have Virginia 3rd, Florida State 4th, Virginia Tech 5th, and are we going beyond that? Yeah, 6.
Yeah, what's 6?
Toss up between Miami and Notre Dame. I'll probably lean Notre Dame. Shout out to Mike Bray. I'm buying what he's doing on the clipboards and his little mini resurgence last year.
Yeah, I have Virginia Tech 6, Notre Dame 7.
Yes.
Tristan, do you have Notre Dame at 7? Okay. Tristan, how do you see the rest? 8
Okay,
through
so
15.
8, we didn't talk about them much, but I think we all trust Steve Forbes, and whatever transfers he brings in, it'll find a way to work out. Wake Forest to 8. NC State,
I completely forgot about Wake Forest, to be honest.
but they're sort of a steady team right in the middle of the pack. But they'll be in the mix. I got NC State at 9. Got Pitt at 10. Got Clemson at 11. Syracuse 12. Boston College 13. Louisville 14. Georgia Tech 15.
Riley, how do you
I'll
see
agree with
8
Tristan.
through 15?
Number 8, Wake Forest. Shout out to Damari Monsanto. Could have a huge season. 6'6", big guard. Not Alondas Williams, and I'm not going to say he's going to have an Alondas Williams type breakout, but I think you're looking at someone who could average close to 15, 16 points per game. And I think, hopefully Steve Forbes can use some of his guard magic on Tyree Appleby and turn him into a more productive and efficient player as well. So I'll go Wake at 8, Boston College at 9, I'm going to go with Clemson at 10. I don't feel great about it, but I love PJ Hall and think if he can get right, like that front court with him and Hunter Tyson can at least give somewhat of a floor to that disgusting backcourt. I'll go Pitt 11, NC State 12, Syracuse 13 still, Louisville 14, Georgia Tech 15.
Okay, I have Wake at 8. I forgot about them because I have them right in the middle. I've been going back and forth between Clemson and North Carolina State at that 9-10 spot. I'll go NC State 9, Clemson 10, Syracuse 11, Pitt 12, BC 13. I'll be contrarian. I'll go Georgia Tech 14, Louisville 15, because Josh Pastner is bound to find another guard that just absolutely embodies everything that Josh Pastner was, and never
and
will
that's
be.
enough to keep them out of 15.
Time for bold predictions.
Congratulations on the one spot move.
Bold prediction time. You know, every preview, Brian and I and whoever's joining us goes through and gives their one bold prediction for the ACC this season. I'll start with Tristan as our guest. What is your bold prediction?
So
for the
this is
ACC
actually going to occur in the off season because of what happened in the season. My prediction that Miami millionaire booster John Ruiz does not invest in the Hurricanes program after they fail to make the tournament, after Nigel Pack doesn't fulfill his obligations to lead them to victory. Because I think their front court's a concern, and they don't have a point guard. And I think that's a deadly combination to be a tournament team. And even though I think Pack will be fine statistically, I don't think they'll win enough. So I have them out of the tournament.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about
Riley, what's yours?
about Virginia. So I'm going to go with Ben Vanderplas leads the Hoos in scoring this year and ends up being the difference to get Virginia back on track. Use him in a little Sam Hauser type role in the blocker mover action. Going to set some pin down, set some flares, pop out, and just knock down threes for days. And give Virginia exactly what they needed, exactly what they missed last year.
I am going to go with RJ Davis is ACC Player of the Year. Because I think that, I don't know if we all agree completely on this, but I think we all believe that UNC is capable of being the best team in the country this year. I personally think they will be the best team in the country this year. I think what defines the best teams in the country is generally guard play. And between the two guards, I know you love Caleb, love Riley, and the dog that he has in him, but I just trust RJ Davis on a game-to-game basis to get it done at the point guard position. So give me RJ Davis as the ACC Player of the Year this year over Armando
Would
Bacot.
not be opposed to that. I would be very ecstatic if that happened, especially as a fellow Davis. So always got to cheer on anybody with my namesake. And I will say, again, that inter-squad scrimmage, you can only take away so much. I know. But RJ looked like an All-American. He played like he was not coming back for his senior season. Like, got wherever he wanted to on the court, was nailing step-back threes. I mean, was finishing at the rim through contact. Like, he had a play where he drove left and switched from left to his right hand midair and just, like, dropped a nice little teardrop in. Like, I'm very excited to see what RJ Davis does this year.
If he's the best player on the Tar Heels, then they're winning 29, 30 games in the regular season, and it's number one overall seed easily.
Yep. And I think they will. Like, I think they're that good. And I don't trust Duke that much that I think North Carolina, they're not going to go undefeated in ACC play, but they're going to be as close to it as you can be without, feeling like you didn't run through the conference. Tristan, thanks for joining us. Tell everyone where they can find you, where they can follow you, what you're working on.
You can find me on Twitter at hoopsnut351, talking anything ACC and college basketball related. You can check my work at Bust and Brackets website, and looking forward to talking ACC basketball and beating North Carolina once again on the court.
And Riley, why don't you finish us off with another little nugget, something you loved or found interesting when you were working on your write-ups for the Almanac that's dropping in just over 2 weeks.
Let's see. What was a good nugget? Maryland Eastern Shore. Buy stock now. No, but I think Maryland Eastern Shore, one of my favorite coaches I talked to was Jason Crafton. Incredible quotes. Like, I'm not going to spoil any of them because I want you to buy the Almanac because we include some like just gold from Jason Crafton in there. But man has a clear vision there. They play a really dogged defense. They're really small. They don't have anyone on the roster taller than like 6'8", I think. But that's sort of intentional. He loves like mobile bigs or bigs, very loose term there, but guys who can just move and switch. So that's I'll tease that. Like, buy it to read. A lot of good personalities in the MEAC. We got a lot of good quotes from coaches there. So don't sleep on that league.
Make sure to buy the Almanac now. The link is in the description. You can use promo code HOOPS between now and release date for 20% off. It's over 800 pages of college basketball information that you will want heading into the season, because we all know that you're paying attention to football now. You're paying attention to the baseball playoffs come October. You're not going to have time until the beginning of November unless you're like us and have just a love for the sport to know everything about every team before the season starts. So the Almanac will give you everything you could want and more to help prepare you. And you can get that on sale now before the release date on the 26th. Remember, like, subscribe, share this video with your friends. If you are listening on any of, Apple Podcasts or Spotify, etc., share with your friends there. We want everyone to be able to listen to our previews as we head into the season. With that, I'm Connor Hope, for my co-host Riley Davis and our guest Tristan Freeman. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to
Basketball, college. Basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball, college. Come on. Basketball, college. Oh. Basketball, college. Whoa, basketball, college.